register, you know, in Vancouver of all bites. That'll shed some light as to
That would be great.
what's happening.
That's a problem, not keeping track of.
There's never really been a need to, but
Well, you think it would have been there.
Good evening. Tonight it's pit bulls and politicians, or pit bulls and politics, I should say. First, here's Ted with the rundown.
Tonight on Webster, sharks on paws or man's best friend. No dog has built a more hated reputation in such a short time as a pit bull. Does the fault lie with the breed or the owners? Later with Webster, a panel probing all sides of the recent pit bull plague. And more with the best of Webster from September 14, 1979, a comic interview with zoologist and author Desmond Morris. But first, confusion gripped the entire provincial education system today as thousands of teachers opted to strike rather than teach. How effective will today's actions be in conveying the severity of discontent with Bill 20? Webster gets the latest on the talks between the education minister and the teachers from Elsie McMurphy, president of the BCTF.
The best laid plans of mice and men gang after Gley. I had planned to open tonight with Elsie McMurphy's report, but she must still be in meetings in Victoria. When she's available, however, we will go to Victoria to interview Elsie Murphy. In the meantime, I suppose I represent the ordinary citizen in British Columbia who is terrified of pit bulls and looks askance at any dog that resembles a pit bull on the public streets, for the simple reason that there has been a massive amount of publicity about savage attacks on children and others all over North America, including Vancouver, by pit bulls or breeds closely akin to them. And first of all, so you know why people like myself think like this, let's look at this little clip from a network special. Where are we? We can't see the clip from the network special at the moment. There it is there. Sound is up on it, I trust. That's a pit bull attacking another dog. And you can see the ferocity of that particular dog. That's a dog which is pulling an immense weight, a very small dog indeed. And that's one of the reasons people like myself are scared witless. Here is Vic Warren of the City Pound. Here is Peter Hamilton of Life Force. Here is Dave Reynolds of the BC Pit Bulls Association with a pit bull called
Apache.
Now, that is a dog, is it not, that was trained to fight and has most incredibly powerful jaws and can be a danger to anyone whom it attacks.
Pound for pound, pit bull would be the strongest dog of any of the breeds, however, not necessarily the strongest dog of the breeds. Pound for pound, definitely the strongest dog.
Is that a young dog?
This dog's about a year and a half old.
If that dog would let off its very heavy collar and its strong chain, if it saw a child running down the street, would it go after it?
No, it would not.
Do you accept all the reports that pit bulls have behaved in the most savage fashion conceivable?
Absolutely not.
Oh, come now, gentlemen. Let's go to Vic Pound. At least 2 dogs have been killed by the police in Vancouver while attacking homicide investigators and that incredible thing. And there have been another half a dozen local attacks by dogs described as pit bulls. Am I correct?
there are reports to that effect, yes.
Now, you know about pit bulls. Do you regard the pit bull or the pit bull cross as a dangerous, savage animal?
Some of them can be, the same as any other breed has been a menace in its time.
Why this sudden outbreak, though, and this attack and the obviously totally unpopular image of the pit bull?
Well, I think part of the problem is exaggeration and incorrect stories in the newspapers, the printed media. For example, last fall it was reported that 2 pit bulls had ripped the head off a dog in the east end of Vancouver, and that was not the case at all. There was a dead dog. The dog was not torn apart. The dog was intact.
To my surprise, therefore, you are not a person who would condemn the ownership or the unmuzzled, loose walking on the streets of a dog related to the pit bull.
I'll condemn irresponsible ownership and dogs running at large, yes.
Is the pit bull type of dog the worst kind of dog?
I don't think that can be said with any certainty.
Now, Peter Hamilton of Life Force is not here to talk about animal rights tonight. He's here to talk about human rights.
Protecting people and animals, Jack.
All right, forget the animals, forget that aspect for the moment, but you have been very outspoken on pit bulls.
Yes, Jack. For the past 2 years, we have received numerous complaints and reports of very savage attacks on people and on animals. And I have to make it very clear that I'm happy that the media, even though they aren't always exact in reporting the stories, I'm glad that they have started to report the stories, because the attacks have always been there. Now, I think there is an increase, but these dogs have been genetically manipulated for over 150 years for the sole purpose to fight and kill, hence the name pit bull. They have that potential problem to attack and
genetically bred.
Genetically
now, as a matter
bred.
of fact, you know, I've been to cockfights in the Philippines, and I know there have been cases in Canada of pit fights with dogs. Is Hamilton right when he says that this dog was genetically bred originally to fight in a pit as a pit bull?
Well, originally the pit bull has existed for many centuries before it was ever used specifically to fight other dogs in a pit. I think a point that has to be made is they were bred, or they have been bred to fight other dogs, but not to attack human beings. In fact, they had specifically been bred for 150 years not to attack human beings.
But that particular dog has a couple of scars on its own ears. Is that from fighting other pit bulls?
That's from fighting a Labrador retriever while he was being walked on lead on a city street.
So he's perfect, that one. Now, what do you say about these dogs, many of which are large part pit bull, I'm sure? I don't accept the fact that the media is always inaccurate. What should be done about people, tough guys who use these as guard dogs, for instance? They're probably the best attacking guard dogs in the whole bleeding world.
Well, that's questionable too, because they aren't being used to that degree as much as some of the other breeds are, such as German Shepherds and Rottweilers or Dobermans. But I think the answer lies in dog control, all breeds. You know,
All right, is that the kind of dog which should only be controlled by a very special kind of a person?
no, anybody could control a dog like this. It's just a matter of if you don't want confrontation to arise, you don't let the situation ever happen.
Well, what do you mean? The dog jumps a fence and it's away.
The dog shouldn't be allowed to jump the fence.
But everybody's dog jump fences. And now, would you agree with me, Mr. Reynolds, that your dog has a bad image, and if I was a mother with a child, I'd walk 100 miles to get away from it?
Based on what has been reported in the media, I believe that you would. However, if you had first-hand knowledge or any kind of contact with the dog, I think your fears would be put to ease.
So you say that it's the dog owners,
I say it's the dog owners in most cases.
and that Rottweilers and Alsatians or police dogs or even terriers are just as dangerous as that one? Could be.
Could be.
But that one has got a jaw clench, which is beyond belief. Is that not correct?
Well, there hasn't been any kind of experimental research done as to how hard a pit bull can bite. For such an experiment can't even be done.
The media says 42 pounds. What is it? 2,000
They
pounds.
report 2,000. There was a court case in Florida in 1986. Broward County had introduced legislation to ban pit bulls, and during the court proceedings, a reporter was summoned to the stand to report on or to clarify that particular story. And when asked what his source of information was, he replied that it was another media report. When the original reporter who had first introduced that story into the media was asked what his source of information was, he replied that he made it up.
Oh, well, now you're going back a long, long way. What would you do? What powers do you need or do people need to protect themselves from savage dogs?
Well, I think the City of Vancouver has come to grips with the problem and are discussing laws now dealing with vicious dogs and detaining of dogs
But
until
when
we've...
if you pick up a pit bull which has ripped somebody's arm off or bitten some child in the face or something, can you automatically put it down?
No,
You've got to wait for the court order to put it down.
that's correct.
Although I'm told by the agriculture minister now that if I see such a dog attacking, I can shoot it if I have a gun.
You can kill the dog,
Kill the dog.
yes.
What's your answer? Your answer is to ban the breed altogether.
We have to find as many deterrents as possible to protect people because the dogs are attacking people. The pit bull is known for their attacks on young children who are running and even their owners. There was a doctor in Ohio recently killed because the dogs turned on them.
Well, in other words, you say it's just bad PR. You agree with that to some extent, don't you?
Yes.
It's a breed itself.
I've got Elsie. We're going to take a break, go to Victoria for my news report, and then come back to you for calls after the break.
Exciting for me today. I usually talk, I think, a little bit louder than that when I'm answering questions. Well, there were thousands of people at the Agrodome, thousands of people at Memorial Arena, and I understand. Okay?
You might have to do that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes, I did. Oh, I'm so.
Relaxed. Deep
Hmm?
breaths. Relaxed. Deep breaths. Pat.
Elsie McMurphy, President, BC Teachers Federation in Victoria, and thank you for coming up to the studio after the kind of day you've had. Have you finished your talks with Mr. Brummett yet?
Well, we finished for today. We have agreed that we're going to meet again on Monday to continue our discussions. In the meantime, we have a group of technical people who are looking at some of the specifics that we've identified in the course of the past 2 days as perhaps benefiting from a little more work.
Good. Now that's exactly what I want to get at, because the teacher's image had been down for a number of years, and then after all the cuts, the teacher's image came back up again, and then wham! You go to your study sessions and your image is blackened once more. Now, you obviously planned the stoppage, but it wasn't a total success, was it?
Well, actually, I think it was very good. I think we have had 80 to 85% of our members out, and I think that is very substantial. I'm very pleased with the way teachers have chosen to participate in the study sessions, to inform themselves and to take their message to the community.
And you don't think it's blackened your image?
Well, I think, Mr. Webster, that we've had so many years of cutbacks in education that I think teachers had to have this opportunity to protest yet another onslaught of legislation. And I also think that this is probably the most serious piece of legislation we've ever seen in our education system.
But you didn't strike for money today. You weren't striking for money today, were you?
No, that's correct.
Well,
what our concern is how this legislation will impact on relationships at the school level and on our ability to meet the needs of our students.
All right, now let me isolate that for a moment. First of all, if I were a government spokesman, I would say, you've now got the right to organize, you've now got the right to strike, and if I were you, I'd realize, of course, that my ability to strike is clipped by Bill 19, and that I'm still under CSP, and I realize you don't like the Teachers' College, but surely the Teachers' College, on the face of it, is the perfect professional collegiate body in which you hold a vast majority, or will a vast majority of the seats for professional development, disciplining, ethics, etc., etc. Surely, in principle, you must agree with the Teachers' College.
No, and in fact, Mr. Webster, if you read carefully the legislation as it's proposed, you'll see that Teachers' College is really an exercise in further government control of education, and it results in a loss of teacher autonomy and in a loss of school board autonomy. Our concern is that legislation will affect the educational relationship that exists in schools and will have a negative effect. And I think that that separation of teachers' responsibilities, the change in the role of the administrators, and what it does to local school board autonomy will result in a worsened condition in our schools. And you don't very often see teachers protesting to the extent that they have today, and I think that underlines how serious we feel this legislation will be if it goes ahead
All right,
unchanged.
let me see if I grasp your point. And God knows I've interviewed enough BC Teachers Federation presidents over the last 1,000 years. Your basic objection is you are losing what you regard as collegiality in the school because the vice president and the vice principal and the principal and the directors of instructions are separated from you and become management. Is that your basic objection?
That's one of them. Research tells us that you have to have a collegial environment in the school, and when you set up that kind of an adversarial human relations environment, it can't help but have a negative effect.
Why should it be adversarial? A good principal is still a good principal, even if he's not in the BCTF.
It is not so much a matter of the organization that one belongs to. In fact, the legislation provides for principals and vice principals to still be members of the Federation, but it is the change in the role and responsibilities of the principal to create a management approach, a factory approach to schooling with that kind of hierarchical system of relationships that's just completely inappropriate for educating children.
Now, let's go to another point. It's been said, it's almost become folklore over the years, Elsie McMurphy, that it was impossible to fire a teacher. And I'm not going to cast any nasturtiums in any direction, but certainly the college would seem to make it a clearer-cut responsibility for teachers to complain, teachers to be suspended, finally with a right of appeal to the courts, I believe, if I read the legislation correctly. Now, what's so bad about that?
Well, there's two things I'd like to raise here. One is the fact that the legislation provides for example, for a teacher to be fired for any cause a board deems sufficient. That, in our view, creates a situation that is a basic antithesis to any concept of natural justice when you include that with the discipline provisions that are proposed by the college. But I think there's a second important point that's been lost in all of this. We did some research. We reviewed 15 years of decisions of boards of reference, which are three-part BCTF reps, board reps, and independent chairperson of teacher firings. Those decisions were 95% unanimous. The teacher representative agreed that the teacher should be disciplined or whatever the case, whatever the decision may have been. I don't think we have anything to apologize for in terms of defending our members or not defending them as the case may be appropriate.
Except that it was more difficult for a principal to go against the collegiality of his colleagues when it came to picking out an unsatisfactory member in that school. Surely that will now put him in a more of a management position and a better judge of what he wants to put in front of the college. Is that what you're afraid of?
Well, the only thing that we've ever insisted upon and have provided for was that our members had due process in those kinds of terminations. And we also feel that a person who is teaching should have the right to be evaluated and have his or her work commented on. And that also is gone from the legislation. It's simply a summary approach to dismissal. And that, to have teachers trying to operate in a professional way with that sort of a cleaver hanging over their heads, again is the kind of thing that we think will have a negative impact on the educational environment.
I don't understand that. When you say, and I can see perfectly well on the board, it's a complaint from 5 members, any 3 members of the council can put it in front of the council. It can be dealt with in various ways, right up to lifting a certificate. But what's the point you're making there? I just can't quite get.
Yes, no,
you feel that the offending teacher should first of all be judged by the teachers in his own school on a collegial basis.
I'm sorry, I was referring to the other portion of the jeopardy that a teacher would find him or herself in, and that is the authority of the board to fire or to discipline. And there is, in addition to that, the proposal that the college would have some kind of discipline and dismissal procedures as well. For example, a teacher could be fired by a board, and that appeal could appeal, and that appeal could be upheld. Then the college would have the opportunity, on the basis of, as you said, 5 letters and 3 members of the college, could then lift the teacher's certificate, whether or not the appeal in the original firing, for example, had been upheld. And so it's that kind of potential for witch hunt, that kind of potential for double jeopardy that we think creates an untenable atmosphere in our schools.
Well, I must admit this is the first time I've had this particular aspect mentioned. It means that you are afraid of Well, could it be said you had tenure before now?
Well, I think teachers in a bargaining sense, in a contract sense, still will have tenure. But the problem is the procedures that would be used to dismiss them are now so summary, so precipitous, and so lacking in any kind of appeal or any kind of due process.
School board can take action by itself.
Yes, that's correct.
And of course, any 5 members can go straight to college if they wish.
In addition, yes.
So you feel it's a witch hunt?
Yes, there is the potential there for that.
It's not because of the fact that you're afraid you won't be able to organize all 75 or 76 districts.
Well, much has been made of the fact that now there's going to be bargaining in 75 districts, and that is the case in British Columbia at present. All of our 75, 78 different locals bargain separately with their school boards. That really isn't any change, and it isn't a challenge to us. And I don't think that there's any question but that the BC Teachers Federation will continue to represent the interests of teachers to support their collective interests that way. But what is of great concern to us is this separation of professional responsibilities to hive them off from teachers and to create this kind of divided camp or divided atmosphere at the school level. And as well, I think it's going to create a very detrimental effect on our ability as teachers to work on issues, for example, such as class size, which I know is near and dear to everyone's heart.
Yeah, that's negotiable now, isn't it, under the union business?
Well, you see, that's another one of the problems in both Bills 20 and 19. Some of the override provisions in both pieces of legislation are so massive and so far-reaching that, in fact, we're not even clear if teachers do have full scope of bargaining has been off-stated by the government.
Well, now I know the points you've been raising with Mr. Brummett. What do you feel are the odds of an amicable settlement on Bill 20, not talking about Bill 19?
Well, we're hoping, of course, that we will have an amicable settlement. I think when we've seen the kind of unrest that teachers demonstrated today, when we know there's an instruction-only campaign beginning tomorrow, I think it's incumbent on all of us to try to find the kind of consensus, the compromise that will help us reduce the level of confrontation and will help us find peace and stability in our school system.
Okay.
We return to our talks on Monday, and I hope that's what we'll find there.
And from now on, no extracurricular duties, instructional duties only, is that correct?
That's correct. Teachers will be offering their usual regular instruction in a prescribed time period, but other activities will fall by the wayside.
No more study sessions?
Well, that remains to be seen, Mr. Webster. I can't promise anything in terms of teacher action right now. I think our main intention is to try to get some substantive talks going with the government on this proposed college on Monday, and I think that's our biggest issue, and that's what I'm hoping we'll be able to work toward.
If you were a union, which you're not yet, although when the legislation passes you'll have to start to organize, would you join the BC Fed in its no cooperation?
Well, clearly we have major concerns about Bill 19 as well as Bill 20. And if there is a way that we can work with other organized groups of labor in the province who are fighting some of the more serious aspects of Bill 19, then clearly we have a vested interest in that as well.
Thank you, Elsie McMurphy, President BCTF, for taking the time on a very hectic day. And I'll be back after the break.
Jesus. Actually, it doesn't look that close.
Well, I couldn't take phone calls to Elsie McMurphy in Victoria anyway because for certain technical reasons. So I brought back the Pitbull people. And I'll take phone calls on it. I'll show you best of later on. Go ahead, please.
So, good afternoon, Mr. Webster and gentlemen. I have a few things to say. Number one, I happen to be a veterinary surgeon from Calgary, Alberta, visiting. I am also the owner of a pit bull, and I'm a Bronco pit bull. The thing is, this pit bull was fighting in the rings at one point of its life, and, excuse me, now that I have the dog, I purchased him from a friend of mine because I didn't want him to be in their circumstances. I've had him for approximately a year and a half since this event, and he's quite fine. He gets along with my kids fine.
In other words, you've retrained the dog.
Oh, definitely. There's definitely, you have to modify their behavior, and the thing that makes them vicious, number one, is the intelligence that the dog has.
Okay, you've made a good point. He
Well,
says
you can't-
you have to modify the dog's behavior. Would you agree with that too?
Well, yeah, that begins from the time you receive a puppy. How you bring it up is going to determine how the dog acts when it's full grown.
Well, again, responsible ownership. He'll take the trouble to
Well,
find
the
out
American
the law.
Pit Bull isn't even recognized by the American Kennel Club and the Canadian Kennel Club as a breed. There are different types of Pit Bull
What difference
terriers.
does that make?
That's
whether or
not-
Oh, well, what it means is that then, like, these organizations don't want them around because of their potential threat
Is
to
that
people.
correct?
No, it's not correct. The American
It
Kennel
is.
Club and the Canadian Kennel Club both recognize them, but under the name of American Staffordshire Terrier.
But the
American-
American Pit Bull is a different breed.
The American Pit Bull Terrier is not a different
It
breed.
is. It is.
Up until 1936, at which time a certain group
No.
of owners took them in a different direction, they were the
Now,
identical
when you
breed.
talk to Fido here, the Federation of Independent Dog Owners, and they'll tell you that the American Pit Bull is a different breed and they aren't recognized.
Okay, enough of that. You say it's called the American Staffordshire Terrier.
That's correct.
You mean to say the little terrier dogs were fighting dogs?
Well,
One time.
Mixed them with Pit Bulls.
the Bulldog was crossed with, apparently was crossed with a Terrier to obtain a dog that was compatible for dog fighting.
That's right, because the terrier was a fighter.
Well,
I remember that myself, my own experience of a dog biting my arm from a terrier. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, why don't we have all the owners of potentially dangerous dogs licensed? All the owners, get them licensed, and if their dogs do anything wrong, they get their license revoked to have the animal.
Vic,
Well, I think that's a pretty difficult thing to try and do.
it's almost impossible. You can't, it's like anybody can go buy a shotgun, I believe.
That's right.
And anybody can get past the game law, little testing for a hunting license without any problem at all. So I don't think that's practical. Do you?
no.
You can find some controls, though.
What controls should we have? Let me go to dog controls. I remember doing a case years ago, a dreadful case where a poor little child was lacerated. And the decision of the judge at the time was that because the plaintiffs, the mother and father, could not prove the dog had a prior vicious propensity, they couldn't collect damages. Is a dog still allowed one bite, as it used to be?
Well, I've heard that for many years as a rule of thumb, but in reality, I'm not aware of it in any law.
Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of it as a direct law.
A dangerous dog, which does things obviously must be put down. But I do believe the law, until some years ago anyway, was that you had to prove that the owner knew the dog had a vicious propensity. You don't know how to do it. Go ahead, please.
Hello, my name is Sheila Cafferty, and I'm really mad because everyone's blaming it on the pit bulls. It's the owners who don't give them enough love and care.
Thank you very much, my dear. That may well be true. But do you know anybody who breeds them as fighting dogs?
Not
or who
s-
encourages them as attack dogs?
I don't know anybody personally. I mean, obviously there are people doing it, or we wouldn't be having the publicity that we're having.
Well, in the United States, the Pit Bull organizations are a front for dog fighters. And I don't have any evidence which links the BC Pit Bull Association, but this is a case in the United States. I don't know what they talk about because the dogs have a history of fighting. So what do they talk about at their meetings?
Go ahead, please. What do you talk about at your meetings?
Well, dog fighting definitely is a part of the breed's history, so it's something that is discussed as is the breed history of any.
But has the fighting dog been genetically changed? Not really.
Through selective breeding, their natural opiates have been altered.
The concerned breeders are trying to take the aggressiveness. Oh, but the dog never specifically was bred to be aggressive.
Okay, now if you've got a number of, how do you prefer to see savage? The word isn't vicious. People are vicious. Dogs are savage. Or animals are savage. How should an owner keep such a dog under control? By what means?
Well, if he obeys the law or the bylaws of the city, if the dog is out, it'll be on a leash and under the care and control of a competent person, preferably an adult. Secondly, when the dog is at home, it has to be contained, probably by a fence, and not leave the property unless it is with somebody.
And if it's a dog which has been bred to attack, I'm not talking about your dogs, it should be in a cage.
Well, I don't think there's a place for that kind of dog in the city of Vancouver.
No, that's it.
Or in any city for that matter.
That's a more sensible answer than what I gave. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, these dogs have a sense of smell. I own one. And I'd just like to tell you, these dogs should be put in a cage. It's how people look after them in a way that most people, my friends have the dogs, and they feed them raw meat. And once they get that sense of blood or smell, that's why they attack. So I think if people look into how do they feed those dogs properly, then none of this would be happening. Thank you.
Comes back to the same issue, how you're going to raise your dog to behave once it's an adult.
Does feeding a dog red meat make it an attack dog?
I've never heard that before, but
I've never had it before either. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep.
Yes, my name's Patty, and I've got a 1-year-old pit bull. Her name's Pepper. And somebody took my dog out of the chain the other day, and they let it loose in Stanley Park.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I had to call the police to report it because I was afraid somebody might shoot her, you know? She's a total suck. I've got a 5-month-old baby, and she's just crazy about the baby. She's crazy about children, and I think the fellow that works for the pound has been working for the pound for too long. I don't think he likes animals that much, because if he did, he would make a point to maybe change the law when people want to buy a pit bull, make people aware.
What happens when you pick up a dog?
well, if it's
Costs so much to get it
the
out.
owners pay the fine, they get their dog out. I compliment that lady for thinking I make the laws for the city of Vancouver, but I'm not that powerful.
If you only keep dogs for so long and then you dispose of them.
They're put up for sale or they're put down, yes.
Fair enough.
I might point out that about 90% of all the dogs we pick up are either redeemed by their owners or sold.
If I could just add that I hope this lady will take very good care of her child, because these dogs, dog fighters have told me that they've been safe around kids and other animals for years, but they will snap.
Bad dogs are bad dogs. It's just that your pit bulls, like in the lumpet, have an image now and for many years to come of being killer dogs. I'll be back after the break. Must not lose sight of the fact that far too many people don't look after their dogs well enough. And I speak from experience, not just in the city of Vancouver. And not all the pound laws in the world or the leash laws in the world will make people keep their dogs on leashes, will they?
Well, they won't, but I think it's a good idea if the public are aware of such laws, and we try and
Do
make them
people
obey
get
them.
charged for not having a dog on a leash?
Yes.
Fines will be increased.
I'll take some more. How much? What's the fine? You don't know.
Well, it's as low as $20. It might be several $100s, depending on what the dog does while it's
Circumstances.
loose. Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Nelson. I'm with the Surrey SPCA, and I thought I should phone in and offer a comment or two on your program.
Thank you.
I agree, take a bit of a midline position between both Vic and Mr. Hamilton. Actually, the dogs certainly have been bred over the years for aggressiveness and gameness, and most of these animals do exhibit that trait. But I do have some concerns that the scare, as it were, in the media as of late take the focus off the vicious dog problem and puts it on to pit bull specifically. And in our job as animal control in the Vancouver Regional Branch for about 14 Lower Mainland municipalities, we're quite concerned with the amount of dog attacks we're seeing throughout the municipalities by dogs other than pit bulls.
These have increased, have they?
Over the last 5 years, I would say quite fairly, they've increased quite significantly.
Yeah, I remember that terrible case in the interior where the little boy's arm was chewed off.
Exactly. That was a Rottweiler. A little girl was killed a few weeks ago by a shepherd. And if we take a look at our statistics filed on our bite reports, we find that pit bulls actually account for a minority of the attacks. This isn't to mean that they're not dangerous. They can be extremely dangerous. But the focus should be on trying to control vicious dogs as a whole and as a problem rather than specific.
Maybe we should have all potentially vicious dogs or large dogs muzzled, eh?
Well, I don't think that necessarily solves the problem either, but I certainly think that there is room for, at this stage, provincial legislation rather than municipal that across the province. Also, I'd like to point out that at the Surrey SPCA, we have now charged 6 people now with criminal negligence causing bodily harm as a result of vicious dog attacks. We've convicted 3 of them, 2 have been acquitted, and 1 still before the courts.
Dogs destroyed?
Yes, in every case the animals were destroyed. But the big picture in that is that upon conviction, the maximum penalty is 10 years imprisonment. And I think it's fair to warn the vicious dog-owning public, as it were, that these charges now are being laid on a more regular basis. And if the Surrey SPCA can lay charges of criminal negligence, so can the Vancouver City Pound or any other animal control agency in the Lower Mainland.
I presume an individual could lay a complaint too, for that matter.
An individual could, but they are tricky cases to investigate and come up with enough evidence. We have to prove, as you stated earlier, I mean, we're not saying that every dog gets a free bite, but we have to prove a propensity to viciousness.
A prior vicious propensity.
Well, it doesn't have to mean an attack. We just have to prove that the owner of the dog showed a
Knew
reckless
that it was
and disregard for the lives and safety of others. And that means he had to know something about the propensity of the dog to viciousness.
a very helpful call. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Do you know Brian? Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack,
Yeah.
gentlemen. Just a fast story here. Last year I was at a beach, adults and kids laying around in the sand, whatnot, and I spotted a man being pulled through the crowd at the end of a 3/4-inch rope by a pit bull, 4 rooster tails behind each foot of sand, and I knew there was going to be trouble. So I watched, and sure enough, a few minutes later, a Samoyed dog came trotting up to what appeared to be just touch noses with it. The pit bull clamped on the dog's face like a bear trap, and the owner's immediate words were, "Someone grab a stick," like he'd seen it before. After about 10 minutes of prying and throwing water on it, etc., the skin on the Samoyed's face finally snapped, and a crowd of 50 people gathered around this guy, and his response was a typical pit bull owner's response. The other dog attacked first, and
You knew that wasn't true.
I knew that wasn't true. I watched the whole thing, and I said to the guy, what I believe now is that the owners of pit bulls who would bring a dog like that among people are as sick, really, as that breed is. When we're trying to live in a more peaceful society.
Fair enough, fair enough. That doesn't give you much praise or encouragement, does it, in the Pit Bull Society?
No, but the circumstances there were still, the pit bull was on a leash, the Samoyed was running loose, and...
But the owner couldn't hold the pit bull.
Well, it's pretty hard to hold your dog if there's nobody restraining the other dog.
Yeah, I know.
Either dog should have been there.
It's a tough one. No. Go ahead, please. Hello, from Assayas.
Yeah, I've owned pit bulls for about 4 years now, and one of the things that I think that everybody should be clear on is that there's Staffordshire Terrier, and then there's a slang term known as pit bull terrier. They should be clear on that. And another thing is that 2 years ago there was a water skiing accident that I was a witness to in Assayas, and me and a friend of mine, we went out there, and my dog followed, and there was about 4 or 5 people seeing it, and we pulled my dog helped pull the person to shore. So
Oh, life-saving by a pit bull. The first good word that's been said, except by you tonight, about pit bulls. Although you're not deadly against pit bulls. You say it's the owners.
That's right.
You say it's the owners.
Potentially all breeds are...
You say it's genetically bred to fight.
According to U.S. studies by veterinarians.
Well, certain types of dogs have been bred to fight, I know.
And
Go ahead,
these
please.
Pit bulls have been.
Go ahead, please.
Hello. My name's Pat, and I have a couple comments that I wanted to make regarding the dogs. First of all, my son was bit in a busy crosswalk in December, holding my hand. Up until then, I had really felt these poor dogs were scapegoats of the 80s. And it wasn't up until my son was bit in front of my eyes.
By a pit bull?
Yes.
Well, what looked like a pit bull anyway?
It was a pit bull, yeah.
And did your boy recover all right?
Well, he has a permanent scar on his shoulder. They're great killers. They're psychotic and they know how to kill. I watched him clamp his jaws down so tight on my son's winter clothing. He did have to go to the hospital, and the doctor said he was so lucky that he was wearing all those clothes.
That couldn't get through. Thank you, ma'am. I hope your boy recovered. That's the kind of story, of course. Now, you two might tell me it wasn't a pit bull.
Well, it conceivably could have been a pit bull. But you cannot use a blanket definition that all pit bulls are vicious.
But these small, are they all colored brown?
No.
Some are brown and white.
Multicolored, they come in all
Multicolored,
sizes.
all sizes. You can't mistake them for a lab, but you can't always tell them separately, can you?
They could be mistaken for a lab or
Anyway, anyone with a savage dog out there, kindly remember your dog can kill. And if you suspect your dog can kill, or if it has been biting and chasing children, have it put down. Is that correct?
I think that's pretty sound
Is
advice.
that correct?
I would agree with that.
Is that correct? Gentlemen, thank you very much for your contribution.
Okay.
I shall be back with a different kind of animal program after this break. First, my apologies to Elsie McMurphy for sandwiching her in between two sessions of pit bulls, but that was the only time I could get her there on the air. Coming up at the end of Webster, programs that is, I'm going to give you a best of Webster tonight, and by the sheerest happenstance, it's about animals. It's Desmond Morris who wrote a book called The Naked Ape, and as I recall, it was quite hysterical, this little rebroadcast now.
I wanted to tell people about the way in which, for example, a vampire bat. Now, I like to take an animal that had a great reputation, like a vampire. Now, everybody was terrified of vampire bats, so I thought, let's show them a vampire, because I wanted them to realize that when you get to know an animal, even a very frightening one, like a vampire, it becomes fascinating instead of fearful.
You had one on your show?
We had, well, it was very difficult to get a live vampire, but we had this vampire bat on the show, and I had a special Batman who I wasn't a bat expert, so I got in this Batman. He turned up driving a car with BAT-13 as his number plate, and hanging in the back window, you know how people have little sort of furry dolls? He had a fruit bat hanging in the back window of his car when he drove up to the zoo. And every so often this bat would sort of stretch out its wings and there'd be screaming of brakes from all the cars behind because
you mean that was a live bird?
It was a live bat, you see. Everybody thought it was just a doll there, you know, and every so often it would sort of do this. However, he was a very strange man, but he was absolutely in ecstasy because he had never seen a live vampire before, and bats were his whole life. He was completely batty. And he got into the studio, and the one thought he had was that this vampire must be protected at all costs. Other people looked at it the other way around. They wanted to be protected from the vampire because even the cameramen were a little worried about having this live vampire. And the thing I wanted to show was that they don't suck blood, as the stories go.
What do they do?
They lap blood like a cat. And so we had to get some fresh blood into the studio. And we had this dish of blood, and the vampire very obligingly lapped blood like a little furry cat, and people saw the way it lapped up the blood. See, a vampire doesn't wake you up when it bites you, because its teeth are so sharp that it can make an incision without you even feeling it. And then, since in its saliva there's an anticoagulant, the blood runs and runs and runs, and it just sits there by the wound, lapping it up with this long cat-like tongue.
Let me get this. Vampire comes in through your window at night, slits your throat, or whatever, your toes.
Toes, usually toes.
Your toes.
Yes.
So sharp that you don't feel the slit.
That's right.
And then it puts this anticoagulant from its saliva so that the blood will... and it sit there all night.
That's it, lapping it up like a cat. And I thought if...
And you had this on television?
I thought if people knew this, it would put their minds at rest.
Oh, of course it would. Just a lovely thing before you go to bed.
So anyway, the vampire did this, you see, and it was a lovable creature. It also jumped backwards like this. It was leaping about backwards, which fascinated me. It could jump in all directions, and suddenly it had gone. Now, it disappeared straight towards camera number 3, who was slightly worried by this, but he kept going, and the vampire was now heading across there. Now, my Batman, sitting next to me, you see, was terrified in case camera number 3 hurt this bat, you see. And so what he did was, in those days, we had what we called neck mics. They weren't like clip-on like this. They went around the neck, you see. And so the Batman, forgetting all about his neck mic, took off across the studio. I couldn't stop him. And he ran right across the studio towards the bat. About halfway across, he ran out of cable for his neck mic. And just as he went out of focus, you see, what the people at home saw was him running up to the camera like this And then suddenly, as he went out of focus, as in all the best Dracula movies, he went and disappeared out of sight. Well, of course, everyone was totally convinced that the bat had got him, you see, when really it was only his neck mike strangling him. So there he was, lying out, writhing on the floor of the studio, choking, with his bat sort of leaping about all over the studio like this, and cameramen climbing up their cameras. It was almost as bad as the time the cobra escaped. I wanted to show people that cobras, I like to always get a message into my story. And the message of the cobra was that snakes are deaf. So all this business about playing flutes to them is a load of baloney. In fact, snakes can't hear a thing. What they're responding to is this waving movement, you see, of the flute. So we took a cobra. Now at the zoo, unlike the professional snake charmers, we protect our animals, we care for them, and therefore we couldn't incapacitate the cobra. In the street markets in North Africa, they'll stitch up the mouth or something horrid like that. But our cobra was a killer. I mean, I'd have been dead within about 25 minutes if he'd got me. And it was one of the most painful deaths. I mean, it's 25 minutes of sheer torture. So I was a little worried about this one too. More worried, actually. And what we did was we took the snake charmer's basket and we put the cobra in, and our snake man, I had to have snake man this time, specialists are always useful, and what he did was he taped the tail of the cobra into the bottom of the basket. Didn't hurt the snake, just bound it round with a bandage and then stitched that into the bottom, so the snake wasn't hurt, but its tail was held tight in the bottom of the basket. Put the lid on, and now when you take the lid off, the cobra comes up like this, and it can't actually get over to camera number 3 again, who by this time was demanding special danger money. And so what we did was I got a flute, and I played my flute to the cobra like this, and the cobra waved around. Then I took a stick of wood, and without making any noise, I did exactly the same thing, and the cobra did this. I made my point. Cobras responded to movement, not to sound. That was my zoological message for the day. And I was so pleased, and I was just saying, well, there we are now. We've understood that snakes are deaf. When, to my horror, the cobra came out of the basket, went over the edge of the desk, and straight towards poor old camera number 3 again. Well, I mean, it couldn't happen, you know.
His tail was tied in, yeah.
His tail was tied in the basket. And this is the only time I've ever seen a television cameraman operate his camera from above. He actually managed to climb up the pillar of the camera, and he got on top of it. There were bigger cameras in those days, and he was kind of lying across the top trying to direct it. No, but he was quite right, of course, because this was really dangerous. The vampire bat wasn't that dangerous, but this cobra was a killer. Well, after the program was over and we caught the snake up safely without any trouble, we couldn't understand how it happened. We looked in the bottom of the basket, and the one thing we'd overlooked was that this snake was just about to shed its skin, and there, taped in the bottom of the basket, was his beautifully shed skin. When things became too smooth, I decided that I would demonstrate how to pick up a scorpion, you see, because that would frighten me, and that would get some adrenaline back into the program.
Pick up a scorpion?
How to pick up a scorpion.
That big tail?
Well, you see, since the sting is in the tail, all you've got to do is to pick it up by the tail, and it can't sting you.
Oh, I see.
Because it's got to do that. And if you've got its stinger, it can't sting you.
Obvious, logical, common sense, sure.
No problem.
Any fool knows that.
Exactly.
Pick up a scorpion by the tail and it can't sting you.
Exactly.
Right, get me a scorpion.
And this is the sort of thing I felt that the children of England should know.
Of course.
It never occurred to me at the time that I might be causing endless deaths. No, actually, I did warn children not to do this, and I warn you now, don't do it, because it nearly finished me. What happened was that I was so scared, having set myself this task, and since the scorpions were again killers, that my hands started to sweat. And my hands got, you know, how when you're scared, your hands get wet. And so when I went to pick up the scorpion, it kept slipping out of my fingers, and this made the scorpion more and more angry. And eventually I did get hold of him. He was so angry now that he managed to curl himself up and was trying to get me with his pincers.
And if he'd got you with the pincers...
He'd have got me, and I'd have got him.
Right. And
I said to the head keeper afterwards, what would have happened? And he said, sir, he said, that's what we call a vicious circle. So I said, well, what would have happened? He said, well, you see, whichever one of you had given up first, you'd have been the winner. And so I said, oh, well, if he'd slipped loose, and he said, yes, you'd have been a goner, sir. So I said, well, thank you for telling me. And he said, have you finished with the scorpions now? So you see, I'd been doing this with great drama. So I said, yes. He said, all right, so thank you very much. And he sort of picked them up like this, put them in the box and went, which rather deflated me.
Because he knew how to do it quickly.
Well, you see, if you do it quickly enough, you're all right.
In case you missed the name of that delightful man, Desmond Morris, and he wrote a terrific anthropological book called The Naked Ape. I'll be back after the break. I'm doing a wrap-up tomorrow night on the AIDS problem, the AIDS epidemic. And I shall have Dr. Blatherwick, Dr. Reckert, Hilary Wass, Bob Tivey, a person with AIDS, and maybe a best of Webster at the end. Is that for tomorrow? 5 p.m. precisely.